Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the high-stakes world of offshore oil and gas platforms. Specifically, we're unpacking exactly how these massive facilities come to life, and we're looking at the fundamental, absolutely crucial math that keeps them running safely. Okay, picture this for a second. You're handed a completely blank sheet of paper. Your project manager tells you to go ahead and design a multi-million-dollar electrical system for a brand new offshore platform. Where do you even begin? I mean, it's like a giant puzzle, right? You cannot possibly size a single cable, you can't pick a generator, and you certainly can't specify a transformer until you know one foundational number. How much electrical load does this plant actually need? And let me tell you, no one just hands you that number. You have to calculate the whole shebang from scratch. And the consequences of getting this initial estimation wrong, they are massive. It is an incredibly high-stakes balancing act. Think about it. On one hand, if you underestimate the load, you're going to build a system that literally trips on day one. Your plant goes dark, production stops dead in its tracks, and it is a complete disaster. But on the flip side, if you play it too safe and overestimate wildly, you end up wasting millions of dollars on oversized switchgear, giant transformers, and these incredibly heavy cables that you simply don't need. So yeah, we have to get this exactly right. Okay, let's dive into this and establish the foundational terminology so we're all on the same page. When we talk about estimating load, we're really looking at two critical numbers. First up is the total plant running load, or TPRL. This is basically the normal, continuous, everyday electrical demand of the facility. Second, we have the total plant peak load, or TPPL. Now, this one includes all those intermittent temporary peak demands. The generators you install absolutely must be big enough to supply that TPPL continuously, especially when the plant is firing on all cylinders at maximum production. So the crucial point is, if you want to accurately estimate these loads, you have to memorize the golden rule of motor sizing. Every single engineer knows this cold. The motor rating must always exceed the driven machine requirement by a margin. You never ever just match them one-to-one. You always have to build in a surplus. It's kind of like ordering extra food for a party, just in case. You really, really don't want to run out when things get busy, right? And we don't just guess at this margin. The industry gives us a very specific rule of thumb table that dictates the exact safety margin you need, based entirely on the physical size of the driven machine. So if your machine needs up to 15 kilowatts, your motor reading margin has to be 125% of that requirement. If it's between 16 and 55 kilowatts, you drop down a bit to a 115% margin. And for the really big stuff, anything above 55 kilowatts, you must add a 110% margin just to be safe. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this actually looks when we put it into practice. Let's say the mechanical engineers come to you and say, hey, we have a pump that requires exactly 90 kilowatts of shaft power. Well, because 90 kilowatts is above that 55 kilowatt threshold we just talked about, we are strictly required to add a 10% margin. So that 90 kilowatt pump actually requires a bare minimum motor selection of 99 kilowatts. Let's actually walk through the math step by step, because there is a fascinating little catch here. Step 1, you've got your 90 kilowatt requirement. Step 2, you multiply by that 1.10 margin. Step 3, you get your theoretical minimum of 99 kilowatts. But here is the trick for step 4. You can't just go to the store and buy a 99 kilowatt motor off the shelf. They don't exist. You have to size up to the next commercially available standard size. And in this specific case, that means you have to select a 110 kilowatt motor. Boom, 110 kilowatts. This right here is the real anchor number that goes straight into your master electrical load schedule. Not the 90 kilowatts that the pump actually draws, but the 110 kilowatts of the physical motor you are installing. That is the secret to how load estimation actually works behind the scenes. Masterclass Electrical Engineering for Oil and Gas, moving right along. You might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Why is this surplus torque absolutely non-negotiable? Well, it's not just a blind safety factor. There are very real-world operational reasons for this. First, we need to account for what's called end-of-curve operation on centrifugal machines. Second, over the lifespan of the equipment, things just get old, so we have to accommodate for drops in efficiency. Third, that motor needs enough surplus torque to literally get a heavy load spinning from a dead stop without overheating. And finally, extreme ambient temperatures offshore can seriously degrade performance, so this margin provides a vital buffer against the heat. Let's look a little closer at that first reason, end-of-curve operation. This is super critical for centrifugal pumps and compressors. The end-of-curve condition is officially defined as 125% of the power required at the maximum operating efficiency point. In plain English, In the real world, an operator might be forced to run a pump wide open at its absolute maximum limit for a pretty long time. If you haven't sized your motor with that proper margin we calculated earlier, the motor is going to overheat, it's going to fail, and it will shut down your entire process. Let's move to and see how this builds into what I like to call the ripple effect. You see, one single motor calculation doesn't just live in a vacuum. Because we sized that pump motor to 110 kilowatts instead of 90, the cables feeding it have to be larger to handle the extra current. The motor control center has to be rated higher. The transformers feeding the switchboard must be upsized. And ultimately, those massive generators powering the entire platform, they must be large enough to handle this compounded margin load. It spreads like wildfire through the whole design. This ripple effect becomes incredibly apparent during motor starting. When you start a really large induction motor direct online, it draws a massive gulp of starting current. We're talking like 6 times its normal running current. This physically drags the entire system voltage down. Now, industry rules dictate a motor must still be able to start even if the terminal voltage drops all the way down to 80%. But here's the kicker. Because torque varies with the square of the voltage, at 80% voltage, the motor only creates 64% of its normal torque. It's exactly like trying to suddenly accelerate a heavy truck up a steep hill. Your oversized motor margin acts as a rescue net, ensuring that even in this severely degraded state, the motor's torque remains at least 15% above the load torque, so it can actually get the machine spinning. And this brilliantly illustrates how motor sizing directly dictates your generator sizing. Because of that severe voltage drop during starting, there is a hard physical limit to the size of a motor you can start on an isolated offshore grid. The rule of thumb here is that a single motor's kilowatt rating should not exceed 1/6 of the minimum available generation. To put that in perspective, if you have 3 20-megawatt generators but only one is running during a specific time, the absolute largest motor you can start direct online is only about 3.5 megawatts. So your motor margins literally constrain the entire operational strategy of your plant. But wait, the margins don't stop at the motors. When we're estimating plant electrical load, we are always planning for the future. I mean, you don't want to design a multi-million-dollar facility that can't even add a single new pump 5 years down the line, right? So it's standard practice to add even more margins at the system level. For auxiliary switchboards, you typically slap on a 15 to 25% capacity margin right on top of your calculated total plant peak load. For power transformers, you often add a straight 25% margin. Sometimes engineers do this by relying on the future addition of cooling fans to magically unlock that extra capacity when the demand eventually grows. Which brings us to the ultimate question I want to leave you with today. We've just seen how a simple 10% roll on one single pump ripples through the cables, the switchboards, the transformers, and right up to the main power generation. It all starts with those margins. So if you underestimate your motor loads today and you skip these vital engineering steps, will your multi-million-dollar generator even have the torque to start the plant tomorrow? Think about it.